Goofy Historians is the funnest place to learn about history. Or is it the funniest?
Welcome, everybody. This is a humorous history podcast, and we are the Goofy Historians. Today, we're going to talk about my new favorite person in history, Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor and scientist, and falconer. This show is going to be great.
And Crusader, you forgot that.
Oh, he definitely was a lackadaisical crusader, but he finally did get after it. This show is going to be great. It's a one and done, so it's not going to be a multi-part series. So you got to watch this show from beginning to end. But that's okay, and I'll tell you why. Because you want to know why, right? It's okay that it's a one-part series because that means we're not going to get to a lot of details, but it's all going to be on our show notes, which are available on our website. Here's our show notes. They even have our logo on it. So you can go to the website, print out the show notes, and read along if you're learning English while you're watching this. Okay, and while you're on the website, you can buy a t-shirt. The long sleeve shirts are great for winter. They're very comfortable. Okay, we're also having some new shirts designed for our Mongols and Chinese Jesus show as we speak right now. And before I forget, just real quick, I wanted to thank all of our viewers. We ended the year at 300,000 views and 9,260 watch hours, which is an entire calendar year. It's actually more than an entire calendar year. So really appreciate that. Thank you for that. So Frederick II, I just want to start with some dry facts real quick, and then we'll jump right into this. So we're talking about the 13th century. He was born in 1194 and died in 1250 at 56 years young. The average age at that time was 30. Really? Was it 30?
That's the average. There was a pretty big standard deviation, and I don't even think it was a bell curve, man. If a lot of people, I mean, if you made it past the age of 3, you were pretty good till 30, right? But if you didn't die like in a war or a plague.
Grandfather Barbarossa lived until he was 70. He died on a crusade when he was 70.
Right, and he just died falling off his horse and drowning in a river because he couldn't get out of his armor. So he could have lived another 20 years. Who knows? Sorry, go on.
He was a really cool dude. They called him Wonder of the World. We call him Frederick Secundo, Wonder of the Mundo. But he was, among other things, he was king of Sicily, 1198 to 1220. Holy Roman Emperor from 1220 until he died. He was king of Jerusalem, 1225 onward. And let's talk about his birth. His mom was 40 when she gave birth, and that was like a big deal back then. So they wanted to prove it.
Yeah, she was supposed to be dead by then, right?
So she gave birth in the mall, basically. Do you remember that story, Joseph?
in the placita, yeah. She at that time you had to have someone there when you were being born to make sure the baby wasn't switched, right? Just like they had someone in the chamber when you were making love, so to make sure you were legitimate and everything.
What?
So it was pretty well documented. It was pretty well documented that it was that he was actually born of his mother, and that was his ticket to the kingdom of Sicily. And from his father's side, he was the Holy Roman Emperor. So his father's side was the Germanic side, and his mother's side was the Viking side. They were the Normans. And when we say the kingdom of Sicily, it just wasn't Sicily. The kingdom of Sicily went all the way up to Rome almost, or the papal states. And that was the problem between him and the Pope. You see, he was always fighting with the popes. And one of the reasons was his kingdom of Sicily went all the way up to Rome. And then right after you got past that, you got into the Holy Roman Empire. So the Pope was sort of wedged between Fred on both sides.
He dealt with two popes at least. There was Pope Innocent III, and then there was Pope Gregory. And both of those guys, he kind of had an in and out relationship with, but the last guy, I guess, Gregory, was the one doing, those popes loved to excommunicate people. Freddie got excommunicated at least 3 times, maybe 4 times. His main rival and adversary, Otto, who also was the Holy Roman Emperor after Freddie got excommunicated, Otto got excommunicated. What was going on with those popes?
That was the easiest. All they had to do was like sign their name, and you were excommunicated. So yeah, that was their go-to punishment. I mean, Fred actually died under excommunication and interdict. So I mean, being excommunicated is bad, right? You're sort of isolated, but to be interdict, that means everybody under your control cannot go to church or be baptized or get the last sacrament. So you've screwed up everybody under you. So, but unfortunately for the popes, nobody took it seriously. They just ignored it.
Right. It's all ridiculous. And the thing is that they didn't take it serious. That was the interesting part. Like the Pope.
Yeah, but Dante later, Dante in the go ahead.
I was just going to say the Pope didn't have a lot of power. I mean, he hadn't really. Could you imagine today, like a current Pope excommunicating a president of a country or something? You were going to mention Dante. So yeah, Frederick was so cool because he was like this Renaissance guy before the Renaissance, and Dante wrote about him in one of his books.
Right. So yeah, Dante did put him in hell in his Divine Comedy, but he put him in the layer of hell that was for the Epicureans, right? And he said, well, I had to put him in hell because he died excommunicated, So you can't go to heaven excommunicated, right? I mean, there's not many excommunicated Catholics in heaven, right? So he had a problem with that, but
right. Frederick II was just like, he was the coolest guy because he was talking to everybody. Before we forget, we should say that he talked to the Mongols. Okay, so Genghis Khan was born right around that same time. They were like the same age. And I thought that
Genghis Khan was a little older. Yeah. So right. Frederick came to power relatively young, but he came to power right when Genghis Khan was at the absolute peak of his power, right? So Genghis Khan he was conquering the whole friggin' world, right? That's what his job was, to conquer the world. And he sent a letter to the Pope saying, you got to submit to me and get on your pony and come to me in Mongolia and submit, right? And the Pope, which was like Innocent III or Gregory, one of those, sent a long note, sent a 25-page treatise on the Trinity. Explaining what the Trinity is. And Genghis Khan read it and go like, what the fun is this, right? I have no idea what you're talking about. So he just threw it away. But he sent a note to Frederick, the Holy Roman Empire, and said, you're going to submit. And Frederick said, that's fine. I'll submit as long as I get to be your falconer, right? You let me take care of your birds, and I'll be riding right beside you, like with the falcon on my arm. And
let's talk about
that. I'll submit.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for just a second, because this is a book that you can buy today on Amazon. It's got 4.5 stars or something, and it was written by Frederick II, and he loved birds. He loved falcons especially. He would spend hours and hours just watching birds. This turns out to be a textbook from the 13th century, and it's crazy. It's like Frederick really wanted to be a scientist more than anything else, and he should have stuck with birds, because when he started experimenting on humans, go ahead.
He's experimenting on humans.
Yeah, because
he's trying to be a scientist. But talk about his falconry book, right? He did learn everything from Aristotle and all the medieval people, and he read all this stuff in Arabic because he spoke Arabic, right? Which is another thing which is very interesting. He's one of the few Roman emperors that actually Arabic was like one of his first languages, because he grew up in Sicily that was controlled by Muslims during the time of his youth. So he spoke Arabic, and so he learned a lot of stuff from, like, at that point the Mongols were speeding to peak, but the Renaissance age of Islam was just coming to its end, right? So all that knowledge from China and Islam, he read it all. But then he combined that theoretical knowledge with 30 years of actual observations on birds, right? So it was an actual, and he compared what these textbooks says from Aristotle on to his own observation, and he was willing to say, now, Aristotle was wrong on this. This is not the way falcons act. This is the way they act, and I can tell you because I got bit by one, right? So it is the first really modern scientific textbook, right, on birds. He also wrote one on hawks, but that didn't survive, so that would have been good. And he wrote one on veterinary medicine that also didn't survive, but the ones on falcons did survive in all 4 volumes, and you can get it on Amazon. Go check it out. 4 out of 5 stars. One of the few, ancient or probably the only medieval Holy Roman Empire that you can still has a bestseller on Amazon. So
well, yeah, I mean, I think we talked about that, and I wanted to just mention my previous favorite person that I talked about was Marcus Aurelius, who was now replaced by Frederick II.
Aurelius, yeah.
Marcus Aurelius wrote a book, and it's so boring. But what I did realize is that I'm not smart enough. Let me finish this. I'm not smart enough to be a philosopher. Even the simple shit that Marcus Aurelius writing and the references to Aristotle and Plato, it's just like over my head. Philosophy is I could learn how to program in Python before I could understand that shit. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about Frederick for a second. So he wrote this book.
Let's go back to Frederick.
So falconry. Great book. You should read it. He didn't, as far as I know, write a book on his human experience. And it's great that he didn't, or he'd be considered like that Nazi doctor that was experimenting on people, because the tests that he did on humans had no regard for humankind. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, so it's one of the ones, there's 2 that he's famous for, and it's not, this could be mythology, because after he died, a lot of stories were circulated about him, but the famous ones are, he was hanging out with his scientific bros. There was the Jews and the Islam and the Muslim friends and the Christian friends, the Catholic friends, and they says, well, they were talking about the soul. Is there a soul, and how much does it weigh? And Frederick says, well, stop talking about it. Let's just do an experiment. So he had this one prisoner that was set for execution. So he brought this executioner, and I don't know if he had to sign a waiver, like you do today when you in part of a scientific experiment. Probably not, right? But they took this, they weighed him on a scale. They put him in a box. They closed the box shut so it was airtight. And then he died, obviously. And when they were sure he was died, now it was completely hermetically sealed for that time. So whatever was there. So then they opened it up and they weighed the corpse, and they took the difference of the weight, the tear weight, and says, well, it was 0.23 pounds, and so that's the weight of a soul, and that's how they determined what the weight of the soul was.
Wow. Okay, I didn't.
The other one.
Wait, before you go on.
What do you hear? Did you hear it like that?
No. I have no problem with that now, because the guy was gonna be he was sentenced to
executed anyway. So better than on the Pike, right? I mean, there's better ways to die. Yeah, especially back then, it was pretty cruel. He could be cruel, but not as cruel as some people, not as cruel as Genghis was. The other one I think is even more cruel, but modern scientists have done cruel things too with monkeys and other primates, but this was actually with humans. And what they said was, they were talking about languages. This is what's the original language? And so his Jewish friend says, well, it's Hebrew. That's what Adam and Eve spoke. That was the language given by God. And the Greeks go, well, no, it's Greek, because that's the language of Aristotle. That's the language of Plato. That's the language of philosophy. That's the natural language. Everybody else is barbarians. And barbarians and Greeks means just those who babble, right? But of course, the Catholics go, well, it's got to be Latin, because that's the language of the church, right? That's the pure language. And Fred goes, well, let's just test it, right? Just shut up and we'll test it. Whatever the natural language is, we'll find out. So we took like 20 kids, isolated them from themselves and their family and everybody else, right? And, well, maybe not from themselves. There was these 20 kids in a room, right? And they fed them, they watered them, but besides, and gave them basic necessities of life, but besides that, nobody spoke to them. They were in complete isolation. And the question would be, what language would they spontaneously start speaking? Would they start spontaneously speaking Arabic or or Hebrew or Greek or Latin? And it turns out they didn't spontaneously start speaking anything. As a matter of fact, from their isolation, most of them died shortly after. They didn't survive because they didn't have any human contact at all, besides among themselves, I guess. But they didn't start spontaneously speaking. So there is no pure original language. So that was that experiment.
I could have told him that. You know what? That's
yeah. I mean, there are still people who think like Hebrew is the original language, right? It's the language that God gave, and it's the holy language. But there is no ultimate, original language. It was just babbling that we ended up learning. So that was, but the fact that he was actually trying to do experiment and not just philosophize is the point. Like his falcons and his hawks and his veterinary science, he was a hands-on scientist. So he was the beginning of the scientific revolution, just like he was the origin of the Renaissance. Before the Renaissance, it didn't happen for many more years. And he was also the originator of the Reformation, right? He's the one who was always fighting against the Pope, even though he remained a Catholic his whole life. What he was a good friend. He was actually buddies with Francis of Assisi, right? And Francis of Assisi was the one who says Christianity should be humble and the Pope should be poor. You should stop building these huge cathedrals. So, which was exactly what the popes didn't want to hear, right? They wanted to build. They were after earthly power at that time. They felt that the Pope was above the emperor is the problem. And remember, at that time, the Pope actually had the Papal States, which was a corporeal realm within that he had an army that he was willing to fight, and these popes did go to war. Well, he went to war with Frederick.
I think that's a good segue. I think that's a good segue to finally get to okay, so the primary reason that Frederick kept getting excommunicated was his delay after he had promised to go on crusade. He kept having fires he had to put out. So by the time he got on crusade, he was already excommunicated, which was somewhat problematic, but it didn't slow him down. But when he got to Jerusalem, he had negotiated the whole situation beforehand. Frederick liked science. I don't think he could ever say he was in a battle. You know what I mean? He never used his weapons, although he was trained in it. So that's the coolest thing, is that he gained Jerusalem back without any bloodshed. And for whatever reason, that really pissed off the Pope. And the Pope, by that time, he already moved his forces into Sicily while Frederick was gone. What a jerk. That Pope was a jerk.
Yeah, I think that was that Gregory maybe by that point. Yeah. So what happened? He was supposed to go on the Fifth Crusade, or at least put some financial backing towards the Fifth Crusade, and he never got around. And that crusade was a complete disaster. Never got anywhere near Jerusalem. like pittered out somewhere in Egypt for how they end up in Egypt, I don't know, but they never got anywhere near Jerusalem, right? So the Pope's pissed at him for not being part of the Fifth Crusade, and Frederick goes, no problem, I'm going to go on the Sixth Crusade. Give me time, I'm getting ready, right? And the Pope goes, well, you're running out of time, and I'm running out of patience because we got to take Jerusalem back, right? Now remember, Frederick grew up with Muslims on Sicily, and he speaks perfect Arabic. He speaks their language, right? And but they were having the Muslims were having a rebellion in Sicily. So he says, well, you got to get out of Sicily because this is my kingdom. But he gave them this whole new city-state at the tip of Italy called Lucerna, right? Which is where he moved them. And he created this little kingdom for them. And then he moved in with them, actually. His main castle was in this little tip of Italy called Lucerna, and he lived with the Muslims mainly, because that's why people go, are you actually Catholics, or are you Muslim, right? It was never clear to anybody.
And that did not endear him to the popes, because that was really easy propaganda.
It did not endear to the Pope. So he had a gaudy bodyguard, right, of 50 soldiers who were Muslim. So he had a Muslim bodyguard, which was perfect because they all spoke Arabic and nobody else did, right? So he could be talking with his the head of his security force in Arabic, and none of the other Christians knew what the hell he was talking about, right? So he could keep this whole security thing within himself. It was this, and the Arabs couldn't speak Christian, right? So it was this little bubble that he could be safe in. So finally he goes, okay, I'm gonna go on this crusade. So he takes a Muslim force with him. Actually, in addition to some Christian soldiers, he brought some Muslim soldiers. And he's going over to Jerusalem, and it turns out there's some waves and people start getting sick. So he turns around and comes home. And the Pope goes, what the fuck, right? You're supposed to be in Jerusalem right now, not back in Italy. So he excommunicates his ass, right? He says, this is it, you're done. And so Fred goes, wait a second, I got sick, right? So I'm just back recovering. And he says, I'm going to go. And the Pope goes, no, you can't go now. You're excommunicated. And Fred goes, yes, I can. I can do whatever I want. I'm the Holy Roman Emperor. So he gets on his ship, and his Muslim bodyguard and his Muslim troops and his Christian troops all go with him, right? Whether or not, if you're excommunicated, you're supposed to be shunned by other Christians, right? But they still followed him because he's a great leader. And he goes there. He gets to Jerusalem. And he goes over to the main Al-Jahir or Al-Kamil, right? I think it's Al-Kamil. And he goes to him, he says, Jerusalem. Do you really want Jerusalem? Nobody wants Jerusalem. It has no statistical, not statistical, strategical. It's like this little city in the middle of nowhere, and it's important to Christians and Muslims and Jews for religious reasons, but there's no military benefit for it. why don't you just give it to me? And
He took
Al-Khmer
advantage. He took advantage of a internal fight between the Muslims, between the dude in Egypt and the dude in Jerusalem, and he negotiated his way into that.
Yeah, in Syria, right. They were fighting.
His life was diplomacy and politics. I bet you he hated all that annoyances of politics and diplomacy. So, it took away from his Falcon time. But anyway, he did.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So Al-Kamel was having a war with his brother. I mean, the Muslims were killing Muslims just like the Christians were killing Christians. And he goes, well, listen, what you don't want to do is have a war with the Christians right now, since you're having a war with other Muslims, right? So Al-Kamel goes, yeah, just take it. Take it. All you got to do, right, is tear down the friggin' walls, right? And tear down the walls of Jerusalem and make sure that Muslims can go in and see, what is the rock of Gibraltar or something? They have a rock there. That's not the rock of Gibraltar. What is it?
I don't know.
They have some Muslim holy sites.
Of course.
You know what I mean? So where Muhammad went into heaven.
Of the Holy Spectre.
Yeah, Holy Spectre. We're terrible Muslims, terrible Christians. We don't know any, but it's not important because we're not Christian or Muslim, right? But for them, it's important, right? So he says, okay, all the holy sites are open to anybody. Any Christian can come in, any Jew can come in. This is just a holy city for these, but it's no longer a military thing, right? And so, red signs and Al-Khmer signs, and the Christians in actual city don't sign because they want a war, right? And they don't like, because they're French and Fred's Italian, right? So there's little bitterness going on there. But he comes back to Italy, and the Pope, you think, would be happy they got Jerusalem back, right? And the Pope is friggin' pissed off. He says, you can't be getting Jerusalem back when you're excommunicated. You got to come back, get unexcommunicated.
The Pope was pissed off that there was no bloodshed. So what's fascinating here is, I'm just going to chime in real quick, because Frederick did fight some battles. He fought some really intense battles. They weren't with Muslims. They were with Otto and against the Pope. So through his whole reign.
Yeah.
So it's just a fascinating situation if you think about it.
Yeah.
He was and didn't fight any Muslims.
Yeah, I'm talking about the one battle he did lose was against the Lombards, who were the army of the Pope, right? The Lombards with the Pope, Popish armies, right? He went up there and he sieged this one Lombard city called Palma, right? And this is the time when Genghis Khan was like, when Genghis Khan sieged a city, man, you were in trouble, right? Because he had all these catapults and he was throwing dead bodies into your thing and palm trees. And if you were sieged by Genghis Khan, you were in trouble, right? If you're sieged by Frederick the Great, nothing happened. You just go into your city and wait for a while, and he'll go home because he gets bored, right? But what he did was funny, I think. It's just so much of Fred. So, and these little cities he's sieging are not like Baghdad or Hangzhou in China with 2 or 3 million people. These were maybe 10,000 people. They were little city states, right? They were small, and he couldn't take them. I mean, if Genghis Khan ever did come down, these people were dead, because Genghis Khan wouldn't even see these as cities, right? He would just swarm over them like a tidal wave.
He was more like one of those.
But this is different.
He was more like one of those Chinese emperors that from the 3 kingdoms that just were trying to out clever each other. But he was so
clever each other.
Yeah,
it's more like that. Yeah.
Sissy,
but
Dante. Come on, this guy was great.
Yeah, so let me tell you, this is funny, because this is the one battle he actually lost. So this Palma, right, 10,000 people, and he has it sieged, and he says, well, I got an idea. He just built another Palma outside the city gates, right? The same thing. He made a duplicate of the city, And he says, well, this is the new Pampa. I'm open for distance. You guys can stay in that siege city all you want, but I've just duplicated what you have. And he had like markets and people going and coming. It's like, so that was his clever strategy.
That's like that movie Blazing Saddles, where they built the whole other city. Just I got a cardboard.
That was he built a city out of cardboard and said, well, we got a Palma V2 and it's better, right? So you might as well just give up because no one cares about you anymore. But unfortunately, what happened, his Falcon got sick. This is true.
Not his Falcon.
His favorite Falcon got sick, who was like in another city. So he had to leave Palma's siege to go take care of this Falcon, for God's sake. This is where his sense of priorities were all wrong, right? Well, maybe they were right. But when he went to go take care of his sick Falcon back in Venice, right? These people in Palma goes, Fred's gone. And so they all came out, burnt down the fake city. And by the time Fred caught back with his healthy Falcon, he goes, well, screw it, man. I'm not going to fight this. And he went back, he left. So that was the one battle he lost. And he lost it because he went to go take care of his sick Falcon. I think that's hilarious.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. And then, the sheriff.
So then, yeah, so one thing, so after he got, so France, there was France and there was England and there was the Holy Roman Empire and there's other shit going down in Italy, right? And once the Pope got so mad at Fred, he says, okay, forget the Crusades in the Holy Land. I declare a crusade against you, and you are officially declared the Antichrist, right? And he called on all the armies of France and England, you know, and they were going to meet at Rome, and nobody came.
Yeah, so he was the Antichrist for a while.
That was funny.
I think that's great.
The king of France.
The truth is, he was a good Catholic.
I'm sorry.
And he took it. So he was like, no, I'm not the Antichrist. I'll take a test. And he did. And he took a test. And they said,
he took a test. Yeah, a written test, right?
Because actually he knows like 5 languages, so he could probably take a test in all kinds of different languages, but he passed it. And then he's like, look, no, the Pope's like, no, only I can say if you pass.
Only I can give the test.
You have to come here. He's like, no, I'm not going to come there. No,
not going there, Pope.
All right. Well,
so
it was.
Well, what else is interesting about Frederick? Yeah, so I mean, he was even famous in his own time, and I think he was never a great general, especially the fact that you can just leave in the middle of a battle to go take care of your pet Falcon shows that he wasn't focused on fighting, but he was a great diplomat, and he did hold the Holy Roman. I mean, he was the Holy Roman Emperor for 40 years, and he was like which is basically Germany and Austria today, right?
Right.
And he basically was in Germany like 4 of those years, right? He didn't like to. He never learned to speak German, right? One of the languages he knew like 6 languages, but German wasn't one of them, right? He knew Italian and Sicilian and Arabic and Latin and Greek. But even though he was the Holy Roman Emperor, he never really got around to learning German. But his son, actually, after he died, it was funny. So when let's go get to the end, because so he finally did die of dysentery when he was like 54, 56 or something. And so he gave Germany, the Holy Roman Empire, to his legitimate son, Conrad, right? And he gave Italy to his other legitimate son, Henry. But the son he loved the most, Manfred, right? He says, I love you the most, right? You're my, even though you're illegitimate, right? You're my favorite son, so I'm going to give you the best gift of all. You get my book on falcons.
Really? That's what Manfred got?
You get my Falcon book. You don't have to worry about.
Well,
just take care of my Falcon.
Based on the royalties over these centuries.
Based on the royalties, right? His family would still be wealthy.
Definitely came out ahead. But it's such such a different, 13th century Roman emperor, such an interesting time, and so different, a couple centuries later, with, Henry the Lionheart. What a difference those characters were, But anyway, I think.
Yeah, I mean, of all the interesting people, probably, Richard the Lionhearted would be the most interesting, but yeah, Fred is the future, right? Is you see the future. You see the beginning of the Reformation. You see the beginning of the Renaissance. You see the beginning of city-states, right? You see the beginning of science, right? The beginning of the scientific revolution. So yeah, he was years before those things actually happened, but I think he set the stage for him. But he was the head of the Hohenstaufen dynasty. His probably Conrad, his son, was the last of the Hohenstaufens. So that was the end of that dynasty.
Yeah,
there you go.
Hohenstaufen or whatever, because that's his family's name, right? And that's the area.
Yeah. And then after that, I guess, was the Habsburgs with Charles and all of those people. And during the I don't know, Charles V, was that still, maybe that was Reformation time? Yeah, it was beginning of the Reformation and the Renaissance.
Yeah, Frederick did pretty good without having a printing press. You know what I mean? Because all those other guys, once the Reformation started, they had a printing press. There was no printing press.
Yeah. Fred didn't have a printing press, so Manfred took his book of Falconry. He made 30 copies of it. That's why it still survives. But those were all done, and they were all illustrated. It was an illustrated science book. So all those birds were illustrated. I mean, it's too bad they lost the one on hawks and veterinary science. That would have been, actually getting into the anatomy and the diseases of stuff of birds. Yeah, I think he would have been happy being the falconer for Genghis Khan if Genghis Khan had taken over the world. He probably would have been a lot happier.
Okay, that's ridiculous. So Frederick II becomes the falconer for Genghis Khan. Come on, that's fantastic. All right. Well,
I think that's great. Giving up the Holy Roman people, giving up his empire and his kingdom to become the falconer of because Genghis Khan, if he had done it, he could have taken all of Europe easily, right?
Yeah, and he would have, except for he died. The other thing I want to say about Fred is that it wasn't just falcons. He had a whole freaking zoo. He had a lion.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So he had all these pets. He had these pets, and he didn't keep his pets in Sicily. He brought his pets with him wherever he went. Whenever he traveled, he brought his giraffe, he brought his leopard, he had a polar bear, he had lions, he had everything. And he just, if he was going on a trip, he just, packed him up and brought them all with him. So
that's crazy.
He was really, really into natural science.
All right, everybody.
Especially the polar bear.
That's crazy. All right, we love Freddie.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching the video. We want to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate your support here, and we look forward to making more content. We also want to remind you, as David mentioned in the beginning of the video, that there will be new t-shirt designs on the website featuring Genghis Khan and Chinese Jesus. So be sure to check that out. And finally, don't forget about our Patreon. We always have new content on there, so be on the lookout for that as well. Thanks again, and we hope you have a wonderful holiday. Bye!
Frederick, you've been excommunicated. Freddie, my boy, you've been excommunicated. Oh, Frederick, you've been excommunicated. Fred, enough of that. Goofy Historians is the funnest place to learn about history. Or is it the funniest? Can I interview you? Or you? Or you? Or you? Or maybe you guys? How about you?